Hi, everyone, and welcome to First Person. I'm your host, Alejo Largo. And as you know, this podcast is about the journeys of immigrants and first generation individuals who've created something meaningful. I believe that our lived experiences, especially as an immigrant or someone from an immigrant family, have a direct impact on what we build and can actually make you a better entrepreneur, creative, or builder. And I couldn't be more excited about today's guest. Rachel Gogel, a Parisian-born, San Francisco-based design powerhouse. She's a creative director, solopreneur, and educator who's led design teams at GQ, the New York Times, Meta, and more recently Airbnb. And she runs her own consultancy as a fractional design executive, helping companies set up successful creative practices. And in our conversation, we dive deep into her origin story, growing up in France, finding her creative spark, moving to the US at 17, building a career in design leadership and entrepreneurship, and now how she's returning back to Paris. It's such a full circle journey full of great insights. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Rachel.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm happy to be here and excited to chat about all the things. So yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. So let's start. Let's go back. Let's start at the beginning. From what I heard from you, your parents are from the U.S., but they moved to France in the 80s, I believe.
Exactly.
And you were born and raised near Paris. So I'm curious, growing up, did you experience a traditional French childhood, or was the U.S. culture a part of it?
Great question. I definitely, so you're right. My parents are from the States. They moved there. It's worth noting that they started my family in Chicago. So my two older siblings were born in the US, and my parents were living in Chicago. And
Mm.
then my dad got a job that brought the family to France. So that is initially why they moved there. I don't know if they knew how long they'd be moving
Yeah.
for. I think
Mhm.
I always hear a story that uh, one of my grandmas thought that they would be gone for just a few years and and would come back. But yeah, my upbringing was very mixed. So I was born outside Paris in an area called Clamart, but I grew up in Paris, and uh, I feel very privileged because while my parents were American, I feel like my entire upbringing was, yeah, not I would say what you would expect, like a more
Mhm.
traditional French upbringing, at least in terms of the stereotypical French ways that you may imagine.
Right.
But and again, in hindsight, I didn't know this as much at the time, but definitely there were things that influenced my upbringing, whether it was just like growing up in a city and being able to uh, kind of navigate the city on my
Mhm.
own at a young age. So just kind of city life. There were a lot of meals. So I feel like so much in French culture centered around food.
Yeah.
And so we definitely had a lot of family meals, whether that was on I mean, my whole life, obviously, before I left for college, so much of eating, at home, sometimes at restaurants, but
Mhm.
and when we had, family meals on Friday nights, and then on the weekend,
Right.
and my parents traveled a lot. I mean, my dad in particular, he had a job or many jobs throughout my those like 17 years that
Mhm.
had him bounce around and have different types of setups. So while we moved to France because of his job at the time, I think, I mean, I could be wrong because,
Yeah.
this, I was very young, but I think he only worked at that job for a few years. It was actually quite short. And
Mhm.
then he ended up getting a job in Germany and then commuting to Germany, but the family stayed in France, and then for the longest period was him getting jobs in London, and I remember that a lot because we would go to London a lot. We even had a flat in London for a while. And then there was a point in time towards the end of high school where I thought I was going to move to London because of how ingrained, we had this kind of uh, other life or setup in London if we, uh, as just kind of like an option.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because yeah, my dad spent a lot of time there, and ultimately we stayed in Paris the whole time. Most of my childhood, we were in one particular apartment in the seventh arrondissement, which is like a neighborhood
Hmm.
district. And then around when I was 10 years old, we actually moved up the street. So I
So
really
all within a
only,
small space. Yeah.
yes, it was definitely about, yeah, just up, providing more space. I'm one of four kids. So as we were getting older, from the first apartment, we had like two rooms for the kids, and we each had bunk beds. So
Hmm.
like I shared a room with my little brother, and then my sister and my other brother shared a room, and then by the time we moved into the other apartment, we each had our own rooms. But the fact that I grew up on the same street my whole life, and my parents are still in that second apartment, believe it or not, um,
That's amazing. Yeah.
yeah, that kind of continues to be my home base. That being said, so in terms of just like French ways of living, it wasn't traditional. It was very much influenced by, my parents being from the US. I went to a school that was a French school, but had, cared a lot about languages. And so um, uh, we learned languages at a very young age. I mean, I obviously at home, it was a mix of English and French, but then had this school experience where I met other kids who came from different backgrounds, and we spoke different languages, and languages became very much part of like how I grew up. Because I mean, English was very much the core, and then for a while I took Latin, I took
Yeah.
Japanese for a long time, and I took Spanish. And I am Jewish, and also like for a long time went to Hebrew school until I was bat mitzvahed, and so I was taking Hebrew outside of like my normal school. So languages was a big part of my life. And so
And
again,
being exposed, right? Being exposed to like so many cultures, so many like languages, being kind of that conduit to just so many perspectives, kind of you're
exactly.
bringing.
And I don't think, I would say, having met other French people who went to other schools,
Mhm.
English was definitely a common language that maybe other schools prioritized. But in terms of the kind of multilingual aspect of my upbringing, that was very much informed by this particular school that I went to, but then also travel. But my dad had this job that allowed the family to often go with him. And so,
Mhm.
to your point just now, I not only was I exposed to cultures just from going to this particular school in France, but I also was able to travel and see parts of the world from a very young age, mostly parts of Asia. That was
Mhm.
definitely our most frequented continent. I mean, a little bit of Europe, but not as much as you would imagine. And then the United States was obviously a kind of a common place, specifically North America,
Right.
and we would see a lot of my relatives most summers, and specifically, I went to this summer camp in the middle of nowhere in Maine. They had a lot of arts programs, for example, like embedded within the summer camp ethos. And so, I mean, they also had a lot of other things like sports, etc. But just and you were just surrounded by nature, and it was just so different than my life in Paris. And if you can
Yeah.
just imagine the contrast between the city life in Paris, going to the school, sometimes traveling and kind of being exposed to certain things just by sheer fact of living in Paris and the history and the
Hmm.
art. And then basically, every summer from age 7 onward, also spending time at this camp run by these amazing I mean, like hippies, but
That's
also
right.
just like, yeah, just like this kind of amazing experience, and also
Mhm.
being exposed to, other people from around the world, and kind of having the freedom to try different media, different arts, different crafts. And so really there's just, I mean, there's so much behind this question because of the fact
It's
that it
yeah.
wasn't just like one thing.
Mhm.
Between my parents, the travel, the school, uh, some of the traditions that my parents brought through were kind of mixed from their own childhoods or how they were brought up. And so all of these little things definitely influenced who I am. I don't think, I would not say it's the traditional French
Definitely, yeah, definitely not.
way, but there were definitely things that of course we were living in Paris, we adapted, but then we kind of made our own, you know our own traditions, our own ways of living, and it was heavily influenced obviously from just kind of what my parents brought over from the States, but then also the exposure to this school that obviously felt very multilingual. And then, based on all the travels and the different things that we were doing, and all the kids grew up to be such different types of humans. Like we all have various interests and ended up in different fields. And so it's always interesting just to think about how, going through, similar childhoods, kind of informed by so many things, like how that ended up shaping who we are today as adults.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's such an interesting, I think, points that you're making. The idea of that when you're growing up, right? It's true for immigrants in terms of you're growing up and you have all of these experiences, right? I'm thinking from my perspective. I don't know if you know this, but I was born and raised in Colombia, but I went to a German school. So actually, a lot of the
Mm.
things that you're saying really resonate because growing up in Colombia, but having a German education, being exposed to the language, being exposed to the German culture, eventually actually spending time, in Germany for a few months with a guest family, and then
Mhm.
traveling to the US a lot before I ended up moving here. All of those things help you form your identity and help you form at least a foundation that once you actually move somewhere else, then you you evolve it, you continue to evolve it. But one thing that I'm curious about is the first time that you remember being creative, like were those the moments, in the camp, right? The camp in Maine, or was it
It's
just even like in the
interesting.
city?
Yeah. I love this question because I know that I mean, just like most kids, you create crafts starting at a really young age, and then, your parents are proud of you and they somehow
Mm,
make you feel like you're, you know, uh, I don't know, like a young genius, which is, is not true, but that's what I love is how when you're young, you can make things, and you're just like very curious, and you don't care as much about the output or what people think,
mhm,
and it's like much more freeing. I remember when I grew up in Paris at a pretty young age, I went to this art, it was like art class outside of
mhm,
school where we did painting and other kinds of medium, and it was a space outside of my normal school, down the street from where we grew up. And I have these memories, they're quite vivid, where I'm painting in the little studio. There's a few other kids around. And I think my little brother, who's 3 years younger than me, you know, there was an age difference, but I think we did this art class together there was definitely some overlap. And then, yes, I do think that this summer camp that I was referring to was something that exposed me to different types of crafts. I think this art class in Paris was more traditional. Like I think
mhm.
we used more traditional crafts, and maybe I was also learning certain methods that felt more French, or more, maybe what you'd expect learning in a French art class. And then this summer camp was, here's this menu of all kinds of crafts, like everything
Yeah.
from stained glass to wheel throwing, ceramics to glass blowing to, I mean, collage. I mean, it was really just everything. And that I was able to try different things. It doesn't mean that I, ended up necessarily pursuing one of those crafts, although I got really into mixed media and collage
Hmm.
in my high school years. But yeah, I'll always be grateful for that camp, just how they set up their arts program, because I just remember really enjoying trying different things, and then coming back to France and to school and kind of, wondering how I can continue to make or try different things. And so
Hmm.
what ended up happening was I tried getting involved with different things at the school that allowed me to create. So I was on the yearbook committee, which is
Oh,
probably
fun.
a very common, I don't know, maybe like
Yeah.
the main club that most designers end up joining.
Hmm.
This was, I used Photoshop a lot. It was, helping literally cut out, class group photos and just making
Hmm.
sure that it looked good. But then as my interest in mixed media and collage grew, I even started creating work and then submitting ideas for like the yearbook cover. So there were, towards the end of my time at that high school, some of those yearbooks like, have art on the front that was
Hmm.
something I made, which was pretty fun. And then there was a summer before college, where I ended up going actually to, there was a summer school at Harvard University in Boston. And there I also took some art classes. And again, I think that's also very different, because now I'm
Yeah.
in like a, US university context, taking classes from certain types of professors. And that was a mix of, I took a drawing class, and I also took actually like a design class. And I think that also definitely influenced some of my early, um, kind of my understanding of creativity, of design, of just seeing and looking at things and being able to
Hmm.
either draw it or make something out of it. And so all of these things, whether it was camp or the art class in Paris, or
Yeah.
even that class I just mentioned, there was an option when I was in high school. So I ended up taking the international baccalaureate path, so
Hmm.
that I graduated with an IB diploma.
Yeah.
Which, if there are people listening,
Hmm.
not everyone may know what this is, but there are some people who end up getting or going through the IB program, and often that that was something that a lot of students took if they wanted to go to school outside of France. So switching in 10th grade out of the French system, so like I would have, had I stayed on that path, I would have gone down the French baccalaureate path, but I ended up switching to the IB because I started to think that I may want to explore schools abroad.
Right.
And then my two older siblings had already left for college and had both ended up at schools in the US. So I think obviously there were things that were informing my decision and what degree I wanted to end high school with.
Hmm.
But in the IB program, you can also specialize in, like, you can do an option, and mine was art. And so, again, it was clear that I was developing an interest in art, and that was going to
Yeah.
help me build a portfolio. And so my portfolio ended up being a mix of work that I did in high school, which was ended up being a lot of mixed media collage, and then some drawing from those kind of like last years. I was drawing a lot of like portrait, and I was often influenced by portraits of people from different parts of the world. So influenced by a lot of like travel photography. Lots of I had like a big book by Steve McCurry,
Yeah.
photographs, and I would draw a lot of his portraits, very like striking portraits, and that was kind of a big part of my life at that time. It's what ended up really influencing my portfolio, and then I started doing a lot of that in college when I ended up coming to the US. So yeah, there's definitely been these like micro moments,
Yeah.
and I didn't know what design really was at the time.
You never know,
um
right? Like it's only until you start actually learning the history, even, right? That when you start realizing, okay, this is what I can do in design, right?
yeah, I definitely, I felt drawn to art. Uh, I mean, just like most kids, you're not really appreciating art or art history until maybe a little later. When I when I think about, even when
Mhm.
I talked about those travels with my family growing up, we would go to museums and galleries, and I don't think I fully appreciated them in the moment, but I was still
Mhm.
there, and so I think it was definitely affecting me, and influencing my taste and my sensibilities, even if it was subconscious, because
Right.
clearly,
Yeah.
consciously, I don't think I fully appreciated those experiences. And then, I mean, now it's obvious, it's one of my favorite pastimes is going to museums.
Right.
And but when you're a teenager or younger, you don't always recognize what's in front of you.
Yeah, you can
um,
articulate it as in your mind, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But I those kind of high school years, it definitely clicked for me. So it was something that I was becoming more and more passionate about, and so I did start appreciating it at a younger age. I mean, I was
Right.
still in high school, but something clicked, and I was, yeah, really into collage, decollage, and what better city to be influenced by when you're walking around the streets of Paris and you see
Right.
posters, and
Hmm.
can get influenced by just the kind of natural art landscape that's right in front of you. So, but yeah, and then I left, and I can't believe it to say this, but I've been in the US now more than half my life. I'm turning 38 this year. So
Yeah.
I think once I surpassed half my
Hmm.
life, which, if I left when I was 17, it's been a few years, it started to become this conscious thing for me where I I feel, far from a lot of the kind of formative years that shaped who I am,
Right. Hmm.
and all the things that I'm referring to right now. It feels increasingly like a distant memory, and I know
Hmm.
that it shaped who I am, and there's so much to be grateful for in terms of my college years in Philadelphia, my early career in New York, and then moving to San Francisco for a job. I wouldn't change a thing. I would still
Right.
do what I did, but I think, as we get older and life things start coming up, and you also just start to question what's important to you,
The
and
priorities. Hmm.
and what your identity, so much of the topics of this podcast, it really is something that I think about often, which is kind of being really aware of my own, yeah, my own upbringing. I think probably because, at least in the last 4 years of being self-employed, I'm constantly promoting,
Hmm.
who I am and what I do, and what type of work I'm looking for. And but often I'm, writing and rewriting my bio, and so
Right.
much in my bio is, I talk about being Parisian. And the more that I look at it and the more that I think about it, because you can't tell, I don't have an accent, which
Right.
is often
Hmm.
something people comment on about me. That it's always like a surprise that that's where I grew up and where my family
Hmm.
still is. Uh, but it really does make me question, like, why am I holding on to these words in my bio? What does it mean to be from Paris? And how important is it to me to somehow, continue to have that be part of my identity? And I guess so much of that made me think about, do you have to live in a place to like really be French or be like not necessarily,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
there are things I think that I'm missing that I think just over time I've become increasingly more conscious about. And it's, yeah, I guess it's important for me to try to live there as an adult and see like how that could maybe continue to shape who I am or what kind of a designer or creative I am that maybe I can't have in the US, no matter how many French friends I may have or
Hmm.
like French activities I may do or things like that. Like I feel very far living in California. I know the distance is real, but I mean also far just in terms of culture,
Yeah.
in terms of art and kind of just the way of life here feels really different than my upbringing. And so yeah, so we're moving in January, which is is a big deal, but because it affects every part of my life. But I don't know, I'm excited.
So I'm curious, what are you most excited about in what feels uncertain and scary of that move?
You may laugh, but
Mhm.
part of this is, so I'm actually nervous about my work. So when I moved when I was 17 to the US, I ended up going to UPenn in Philadelphia and ended up declaring my major early, maybe like early
Mhm.
sophomore year, which shows, I was pretty certain that design was something I wanted to do. And uh, I bring this up because it's just the craft that I ended up learning was in English. Like
Right.
I learned about typography and design and design history through this, I mean, yes, it was like a pretty Western lens, and I've expanded that ever since, but still very, kind of more traditional, design school, but through the English language. And my whole career, from working in magazines to working in media and tech, and then a design studio, like all of that, all of the muscles that I have um, had to flex over time, even my people management skills are,
Hmm.
generally working with Americans. I
Right.
mean, I tend to obviously have interacted with people from different parts of the world, but I would say, there's so much in the US like job culture that is very unique
Yeah.
to the US market. And I even, I've taught in different universities,
Hmm.
SVA and CCA, and feel very lucky that I've been able to teach at these different institutions. But I'm,
Hmm.
conscious that it may not be as easy to just show up in Paris and then, slip right into being able to teach a class about design or anything, in French. And even as a native speaker, I guess I'm, yeah, just very conscious of having the kind of the business.
Talking to a client, yeah.
Yes,
The
there's the client
right.
services.
Hmm.
There's understanding kind of business implications. There's the terminology, whether that's about the crafts, but also just running a business. And so I'm very self conscious about that. I think, I mean,
Yeah.
the learning curve. Once I dive in and get surrounded by it, I'm very excited about learning, and I want to learn, and I it may take me a little bit, but obviously it's easier as a native speaker because hopefully it'll come faster than if I was, let's say, not a native
Yeah.
speaker.
I was
But
just gonna
yeah.
say that this actually resonates a lot because I have the same thing with Spanish, right? That Spanish is my first language, but I learned design in the US. So 100% whenever I go back and even explain, so I'm not moving back to Colombia, but when I go and explain what I do,
Yeah.
it's hard to find actually the words. It's like, hey, actually, I don't think I've ever said this word in this context, right? In Spanish, even though it's my first language.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
think so. A lot of people have been asking, well, what will you do for work?
Hmm.
And ideally, I can keep doing what I've what I've been doing, but just from there, which I know I'm not naive. I know that
Yeah.
it's not just going to be this thing where I show up and then it's exactly, the way that I've been operating here, but there. I know there's more to that, but at the core, it's like I would love to stay self-employed. I would
Hmm.
love to have clients, kind of based in different cities. Obviously, while I'm only 4 years into running my own business, most of my clients generally have been either West Coast or East Coast. I only just had a client last year who actually is based in France, and that just kind of gave
Hmm.
me a taste of a few things. But she speaks English, so also that was just kind of different. And so, I think about where my clients could or should be. I think about, am I able to keep my business in the US but live in Paris? Do I eventually open up an actual French business,
Hmm.
a corporation, or not? I do see the first few years as kind of like a transitional time where it may feel like certain things are still in the US, but I'm based there, and I have friends who show me that that's possible.
Yeah.
Um, there's so many other things just in terms of knowing that the French system, uh, you hear a lot about things taking time and they make certain things harder for you. And so I know I'm also conscious of other things related to just living in France, like even proof of employment being really important to renting an apartment, for example. And, I work for myself versus having like a kind of legitimate company proof of employment, kind of showing that, I get a regular salary. I think there's some bias towards people who are self-employed, I've heard, or they're not as like, I know this is going to sound weird, but kind of
Hmm.
accepted in society. It's seen as like there's clearly a lot of people who are self-employed, but it kind of, again, works differently just in terms of how certain things work and how much harder it may be to do certain things. So I'm conscious of the elements like embedded in the social fabric, whether that's renting an apartment or you know so many, like healthcare and just kind of general things that will kind of legitimize the
Right.
move, even though
Hmm.
I am a French citizen. So obviously that helps me. My wife is not; she's an American citizen, but hopefully could have eligibility to apply for French citizenship. And those are things I'm conscious of. But the thing I think about the most, which probably is because it's like my livelihood and it helps
Hmm.
support the way that we live our lives, yeah, is my work. Part of me moving to Europe is also to you know kind of open up the aperture in terms of different clients based elsewhere, different interests, different languages. I think it's maybe part of that is I want that challenge, and it would expose me to European design and European designers. And I think that there's some element even in my choice to move. There's the consciousness of just how do I feel about the state of design in the US and the types of conversations that I find myself in more and more. And it could also be like I'm very much in a certain bubble near Silicon Valley in California, attending certain kinds of design events, meeting certain types of people.
Hmm.
And the more that I'm here, the more I question, do I fit in? Is this something that I'm interested in? Do I feel I want something else? Or have my interests changed? It just kind of helps me pose a lot of questions. And so I'm excited also just in the prospect of the move actually exposing me to parts of my craft that like right now just feel very far, and it would change the hopefully the types of conversations that I'm having, expose me to other kinds of design, other kind of interesting that are happening just by living elsewhere and talking to different people, and you know I don't know, I guess changing it up. But
Yeah.
some of it is like me obviously just being conscious of the like learning the language of design in France, essentially. But also like through that experience, like hopefully that helps push me as a creative and as a designer to actually evolve beyond like the type of work that I'm doing right now. And I'm really
Yeah.
interested in doing that. I'm excited. It's scary, but I'm excited.
Yeah. And and I would say in hearing all of this, I think at the core, I would say from my perspective, you're an entrepreneur, right? I think there is that curiosity that came from where you were, your upbringing, right? Of kind of being part of or seeing all of these different perspectives, moving to a new place, getting into design, but also studying a business in design, which I think it's really interesting. And then now trying to also now go back and figure out what is what is your path, your career, right? So I think curiosity and being an entrepreneur, it seems that it's a common thread of always trying to figure out, right, like what are the things that that challenge you, and the things that excite you and that might be scary and all of those things. So I'm wondering, might be helpful to talk a little bit about that entrepreneur and the solopreneur, I guess, kind of side of things, because it would be interesting to understand almost like how you started your business here, which
Sure.
again, like my to your point, might change a little bit in kind of once you actually go there, and you'll have to kind of figure that one out. But I'm curious, even for some people that might not know. So obviously, like you have experience of working across many amazing companies, but you pivoted and you started your own fractional business, right, as a design executive. So even just to kind of level set, what is fractional consulting, from your perspective?
Sure. So I'll just say that first of all, you're right about the entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah.
I think I got a lot of that from, I mean, both of my parents, but specifically my dad. And that curiosity you would find if you ever meet my siblings. We all
Yeah.
took a little bit of that, and then took that curiosity in completely different areas. And I would say, now that I think about it, all four siblings have started a business at some point
Oh,
in their
interesting.
lives.
It's in the family. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's definitely in the DNA. And in terms of, for me, it was something that was in the back of my head even when I was graduating from college. So I graduated in a recession. I
Hmm.
bring that up because I couldn't get a job at that time. And so it forced me very early on in my career to find freelance work, which meant that I was thinking about what I should charge, how I should talk about my skills, how I should position myself. And because I couldn't find a full time job, I had to not only, you know, kind of start that type of hustle or find these side projects. I mean, I was also conscious of just trying to build experience, but it really
Hmm.
exposed me to clients and that kind of business mindset pretty early on as a creative, as a designer. So this was right as I was graduating, and I started doing that, and then I ended up getting an internship in fashion, actually in their marketing art department for Diane von Furstenberg's studio in New York. I really wanted to work in magazines. That is where I ended up. A lot of my
Hmm.
freelance projects at the time is what actually led me to my first job at GQ. And so I will always be grateful for kind of taking on all of that freelance work, because really it's what actually allowed me or helped me get a
Yeah.
full time job. So in the back of my mind, that whole time, I thought, one day I would love to work for myself. And, not everyone may have that thought, but I had it from a pretty early on in my career. I think it was just a question of when and what would that look like. And for a long time, I imagined running a studio with people, and
Hmm.
there was a physical manifestation of this idea that we would have a space and I would have a team, And for a long time, I kept in my phone, I kept like a name of potential like studio name ideas.
Yeah.
Um,
It'd be
and
fascinating to see what some of those names were.
I mean, it's kind of all
Yeah.
over the place, but I share that because it was something that I really thought about, but I, for a long time, was, to your point, kind of full time at these big companies. So I was at GQ, I was at the New York Times. I moved to California to work at Facebook. And then I ended up trying an agency gig for a very small design studio, which was so nice because it allowed me to just kind of see the other side. Most of my
Mhm.
experience had been in house at much larger companies. And then I was able to try like a really small design studio where I was able to interact with the founders. And it was very, very small. And that was more agency side. Again, I share this because I felt personally like between the various industries, big companies, small companies, in house, agency, like by the time I decided to go out on my own, I felt like, okay, I
Mhm.
feel like I've been exposed to all, so many different types of things that I feel like I could try and do my own thing. But the real story is that I actually resigned from Godfrey Dadich. This was peak pandemic,
Mhm.
fall 2020. This was before the vaccines came out. I actually resigned to go to a job at Netflix. And I don't talk about this a lot
Yeah.
publicly for no reason other than it doesn't always come up, but it's
Mhm.
worth sharing because throughout that summer, I was going back and forth with that company. And it's not like I was unhappy at Godfrey Dadich. It just, this opportunity came up at Netflix.
Right.
If you can imagine, Netflix was like booming at the time. It was a very interesting role that I was helped shape. And basically, 2 days before my last day, my would have been boss at Netflix got let go.
Oh no.
And then, yeah. And then because of her departure, I reached out to HR and, as you can imagine, tried to figure out what that meant for me. And they actually, it's not like they eliminated the role, they just changed the role that
Right.
I was going to have. And then long story short, it actually, then was no longer the right fit. But I was already technically an employee of Netflix because I had signed the contract, I had already, negotiated, I had interviewed everything. And so when we decided that the role was no longer the right fit for me, I negotiated a severance.
Mhm.
um, and that actually became like the origin story of my business because it allowed me to start my independent venture
Right.
without feeling the pressure
Mhm.
of needing to take on a lot of clients quickly, because essentially I got this money from Netflix that was essentially like, imagine just starting your company with almost
Yeah.
like seed money or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, like someone invested in, in your company, right? I guess
Yes.
Netflix invested in your company.
Yes, exactly. So there was a silver lining of this
Yeah.
pretty bad situation, but I'm, proud that I negotiated a severance, and then that was kind of the beginning of me going out on my own. So not everyone knows that story, but I thought I would share it because it gave me the confidence to finally start my business, and start my business in such a way that, followed a lot of the things that I wanted to build. So I also had some health stuff going on at that time, and
Mhm.
so I think between health stuff and the severance, and it was a scary time, October 2020. Um, but it allowed me to be more selective
Yeah.
with my clients, and so I ended up taking on one client that was essentially a part-time, almost a part-time role, and that was my introduction to fractional
Mhm.
work. I didn't call it that at the time, but the term came up maybe like a year and a half in. I was, on LinkedIn and saw some people using it, and I was curious about what it meant. And then the more that I learned about it, the more I realized it actually really was a word that actually held a lot of meaning and was something that was very clear, and it felt like I could relate to it, or it could be used and easily understood. And so I was like essentially a fractional ECD for Departures magazine. You could see a poster in the background here.
Yeah, I can see it.
And I ended up working for this agency called Giant Spoon. They were amazing clients, and I
Mhm.
helped them reimagine Departures. It was this kind of new time. American Express ran Departures. They essentially moved Departures out of Meredith publication, and then basically we built like a publishing arm within Giant Spoon that ran
Mhm.
Departures for a few years. Unfortunately, it no longer exists, but it was a great ride. And I bring that up again because while I didn't call it fractional, it's exactly what that was. They were a client. It wasn't full time. We came up with a payment model that made sense for both parties, for me and for the
Mhm.
client. And I provided kind of strategic, value. Like, it wasn't just design, it was building the team, it was understanding the infrastructure of this new publishing arm, it was interacting with C-suite executives, it was hiring talent. I mean, it
Mhm.
was kind of all the things that you would maybe expect from a full-time ECD, except I was doing it at a part-time capacity. And essentially, the word fractional is not new. It's historically been associated with C-suite execs in the past, like CMOs, CEOs, CFOs, etc. And it was just a term that started to make sense as some people decided to go out on their own, or as maybe layoffs were happening, just due to COVID and different businesses changing their
Mhm.
strategies. And so a lot of like experienced or seasoned professionals were suddenly in the market,
Right.
and they didn't necessarily want to be hands-on designers. They didn't necessarily want to go back full time. And so this term ended up becoming like almost like reclaiming this term specifically for like various, creative leaders who wanted to try to at least position themselves as, hey, I could do a lot of the things that normally I would do full time, but at a part time capacity. And, guess what? You can also save money by hiring me, because long term, I'm providing a lot of value, but you're saving money because you're not hiring me full time, which means, no benefits, no equity, like stock, etc. Like, generally, you may end up actually saving money. And so, but on the flip side, for the employee, um, I can remain independent. I can take on other clients. I am more flexible. I'm more agile. So there's kind of, again, win-wins is like a long list of benefits on both sides. But yeah, it again. I didn't call it at the time, but basically every year since, I've tried to take on fractional work for various types of organizations, and it's been really fun to experiment and see uh, different agencies and big companies. So in-house and agency side have been experimenting with outsourcing talent, or
Mhm.
outsourcing work that requires someone like me to come in and maybe help them through a transitional period. And I feel very lucky because basically every year since, I've had different kinds of roles, whether that's 3 months, 4 months, a year and a half, 7 months, whatever that may be, where I'm essentially, a part-time, creative lead in some capacity. And I'm particularly interested in more, mid-sized or slightly more mature companies. I think
Mhm.
I have helped some smaller organizations, but where I think I thrive is specifically where, the company's in flux, the brand is evolving, maybe a creative director just left, and I'm coming in as like an interim lead and helping them hire my like a full-time replacement. So there's these like very specific periods of time where I feel like I can add a lot of value based on my experience, but it can be
Yeah.
very like specific. So yeah, it's
But
it's really fun for the fractional work. It's maybe not for everyone, but it
Mhm.
definitely is an option. And so if people are interested in learning more, I have more information on my website. And but yeah, it's I have noticed over the last 4 years the term get used more and more, and maybe to the point where I don't know, maybe now it's getting used too much. I can't tell.
No, I think it might be a
Um,
good thing, like because actually
yeah,
you're an advocate for it, right? So I think like that's one of the really cool things that I've seen you like writing about it. I've seen you being vocal and trying to educate people
yeah,
into, like you were saying, it's an option, might not be for everyone, but it does give you time. It gives you agency. It gives you independence. So for whoever is looking for that,
yeah.
it could be a great option.
And I'll just say, like, so basically, just to close in terms of my career, consulting is really only a fraction of my time, pun intended.
Mm,
So fractional, it's like
right.
actually a fraction of my time because it has allowed me to, if you play your cards right and you work a certain amount of hours and then charge a certain value, then suddenly, again, depending on the lifestyle that you want, for me, it gave me time to teach, it gave me time to mentor, to do some writing, to volunteer. Obviously, not all of the things that I just said brings in the same amount of income, but for me, it's about balancing my different passions and areas of interest so that I can essentially design my time and design my life essentially. And so the consulting work that I do, I guess what I want to say is that it's not 100% of my time.
Right.
It's
Hmm.
actually, even for me, just a fraction so that I can do so many other things. And I think I will say that I think there's like a European mindset kind of embedded in that ethos. And
Hmm.
I don't know if I realized this as consciously before, but the more I think about our move, the more it makes me realize that the way that I've been trying to build my business is actually like, if you would think of, the whole concept of you live to work versus work to live,
Right.
like
Hmm.
for me, it's being able to kind of integrate all of these things so that it supports this lifestyle that I, want with my wife, and for us to just live this life that feels balanced and gives us time to do a lot of the things that we love to do, but it's not centered around just work, like what you would
Right.
traditionally think of
Hmm.
as work. And when I talk to other people who are mostly based here or come from more of a US background, it sounds like kind of different or refreshing, or like that I have more balance, or like, how did I,
Hmm.
design it this way? And I try to remind people that, anyone has the power to design their time. I mean, obviously it kind of depends on everyone's circumstance, but I guess, yeah, just back to the origin of I know the topic of this podcast, it actually has, I think there's so much in the European mindset, like I'm
Hmm.
about to take like a month and a half off,
That's amazing. Yeah.
like, which,
Hmm.
to more people may sound like, wow, like that's, but to me that's important. Like I kind of
Yeah.
need that time to recharge in order to then move on to my next project. And yeah, I would say, having built my career in the US, even just the concept of time off at all is like, most people don't even take most of their vacation days, you know so it, like,
100%.
yeah, it's something where that's very different if you talk to people who work in Europe, where they take vacation, every few weeks. So I think, again, whether I realized it or not, there's a lot of things from the way that I grew up or the way that I want to live my life
Right.
that feel probably more French or European than I maybe consciously realized. And I'd
Hmm.
be curious to see like how that continues to evolve over time.
That's amazing, and we're coming
Yeah.
full circle. So it's really great. I'm very excited. I think to hear and to see, moving there. Like once you move there, and how do you evolve your practice? How do you evolve your philosophy? I think that idea of designing your time, it's such a strong concept, right? That I feel like everybody wants that. So to be able to actually create a life that allows you to do that, it's amazing. So yeah, I mean, Rachel, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time. I really enjoyed learning about your journey. The courage to try new things. I think that that comes through very strongly. And then, yeah, like wish you the best in Paris, and thank you again for chatting with us.
Thank you. And yeah, like give me a shout if you're ever there once I'm settled. Would love to meet in person.
We'll do. We'll do. All right.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for having me, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome. Same here. Bye.
Thanks.
So that was my conversation with Rachel Gogel, a designer, educator, and solopreneur whose journey exemplifies how our lived experiences shape who we become and what we create. From her early days in Paris, that set a strong foundation, to leading design teams at GQ, the New York Times, Meta, and Airbnb, Rachel has consistently leveraged her multicultural background and curiosity to navigate and influence the design world. Her transition into fractional design leadership and ability to design her time are great examples of how it's possible to balance work with personal values to create a fulfilling life. And her new upcoming journey moving back to France to experience it as an adult really speaks volumes about her curiosity and willingness to embrace uncertainty. So Rachel's story exemplifies the idea behind this podcast, and I couldn't be more thankful for her time and insightful conversation. And to you, thank you for joining me on First Person. If this episode resonated with you, please subscribe and leave a comment and a review. You can also follow us on Instagram and connect with me on LinkedIn to stay updated on future episodes. Until next time.